All right, so you want to talk about inclusive education in Peru.
We're going to dive deep into that.
Yeah, and you know what? We've got
We have a lot of sources on this one.
a ton. So many. We've got these academic papers and these reports.
Yeah.
And even some personal stories that,
Yeah.
that kind of bring this whole thing to life.
Yeah. A really rich picture.
Yeah. Oh,
And it's not
excellent.
just numbers and policies we're talking about. We're
Yeah.
talking about changing mindsets
Okay.
and creating a system where every single student
Right.
in Peru, regardless of their ability, has a real chance to thrive.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's get started.
Let's do it.
One of the first things that kind of jumps out at me from these sources
Okay.
is that there are a bunch of different definitions of what disability even means
Right. And it's
in the Peruvian context.
it's not always a simple, straightforward thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of categorized as physical sensory,
Okay.
which includes, things like visual and auditory impairments,
Mhm.
intellectual and psychosocial,
Right.
relating to mental health.
Interesting. So it's not like just one thing that you could
It's
just...
not a single box.
Yeah.
It's a really diverse spectrum.
Okay.
And that diversity is really important when we're talking about crafting a truly inclusive education system.
Right. So how is Peru actually doing, like, how are they approaching this? Was it just putting kids with disabilities into mainstream classrooms, or is there more to it?
Well, there's a really important distinction here between integration and inclusion.
Okay.
Integration is about physical presence.
Okay.
Putting students in the same space, but inclusion is about making sure they can actually participate.
Okay.
And that requires adapting the learning environment and the methods
Got it.
so that everyone's needs are met.
So it's not just about, like, okay, you can get into the classroom.
Right.
You can physically get in there.
It's not just about building a ramp to
Yeah.
make sure a student in a wheelchair can get into the building.
Right.
It's about making sure that student can fully engage with what's being taught,
Okay.
regardless of their limitations.
So that's really interesting. But I mean, from what I'm seeing in these sources as well, Peru's trying to do this,
They're pushing for.
but there are some pretty major hurdles.
There are some stark realities.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest things that are kind of standing in the way?
So the sources kind of categorize these barriers in three main ways: architectural, social, and educational.
Okay. Let's start with architectural. That sounds pretty
Straightforward.
straightforward. Yeah.
Architectural barriers are the most visible.
Well,
Think about a school with stairs but no ramps,
okay.
bathrooms that aren't accessible.
Right.
These are the physical obstacles
Yeah.
that literally prevent access from the get-go.
And I mean, there's the social barriers as well.
The social barriers are even trickier because we're talking about attitudes here.
Right.
Discrimination, stigma that people with disabilities face, not just from their peers, but sometimes from teachers and even their own communities.
Yeah. And that really stood out to me in those personal stories.
It's like being constantly told that you don't belong,
Right.
that you're a burden.
Right.
And that can be really damaging, especially for a young person.
And then there's the educational barriers,
Yeah.
which are different.
So that's about the structure of learning.
Okay.
Think about trying to learn from a textbook that isn't in Braille if you're visually impaired.
Yeah.
Or sitting through lectures that ignore your learning style if you've got a cognitive disability. It's just not set up for you to succeed.
And this statistic really kind of blew me away.
66% of universities in Peru
66%.
have students with disabilities enrolled, but only 16% of those universities
Wow.
actually provide teacher training on inclusive practices.
So it's almost like, okay, we want to do this. We've got the laws in place, but we're not giving teachers the tools that they need.
Implementation is lagging behind
Yeah.
the good intentions.
But the sources also highlight some cool things that are happening
Oh, absolutely.
that Peru is actually putting into action.
So they're taking a multifaceted approach.
Okay, tell me about that.
First off, they're tackling the physical environment.
Okay, so like literally the ramps and the bathrooms and that sort of thing.
Ramps, accessible bathrooms, but also just thoughtful design.
Okay.
Clear signage, well-lit spaces, furniture that can be moved around easily. It's
Okay.
not just about making it accessible. It's about making it welcoming
Okay.
for everyone.
Okay, so that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then what about those social barriers?
So that's where things get trickier.
Yeah.
But one place to start is with inclusive language.
Okay.
So the sources really emphasize that Braille and sign language aren't just alternatives.
Right.
They're essential tools for communication and for inclusion.
Right.
Imagine being shut out of conversations just because you communicate differently.
Right.
It's incredibly isolating
Yeah.
and dehumanizing.
Yeah. So Peru is trying to actually like make sure that these languages are promoted.
They're making a real effort to make them fundamental parts of society.
Yeah.
Not just something on the sidelines.
I like that. And the educational strategies as well.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that because if you're going to have inclusion, you've got to adapt the way you teach.
Right. And this is where things get really innovative.
Okay.
Peru is moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to learning.
Right.
So they're developing personalized learning plans,
Okay.
integrating assistive technologies, and they're really embracing a wide range of teaching styles.
So give me some examples.
Think visual aids, hands-on activities, flexible pacing,
Okay.
recognizing that everyone learns differently and
Yeah.
tailoring the experience to match.
So it's really like embracing the difference as a strength, not a weakness.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's not just about supporting students with disabilities.
Right.
It's also about recognizing and nurturing the talents of those who really excel academically.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up because one of the things that we saw in these sources was this PANITS program.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
PANITS is all about providing gifted students
Okay.
with the support and the challenges that they need.
Right.
So think enriched curricula, accelerated learning opportunities,
Okay.
a chance to connect with other students
Right.
who are just as curious and driven as they are.
Yeah. So it's really like, you've got those kids who need extra help,
Yeah.
and then you've got the kids who are ready to just like go ahead, zoom ahead.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. And then, let's not forget about early intervention as well.
That's crucial.
Yeah, we were reading about this program called PRITE.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So PRITE is a really good example of how Peru is investing in early childhood development.
Okay.
It's an early intervention program that's designed to help children with disabilities access educational support from a very young age.
And research shows that early intervention can make a huge difference in a child's life.
So give me an example.
Imagine a child with a speech delay
Okay.
who gets speech therapy at the age of 3 instead of waiting until they're 6 or 7.
Right.
Those early interventions can really smooth the transition into school and beyond.
So it's like giving them the tools that they need right from the start.
Exactly.
And that has like a ripple effect throughout their whole lives.
It really does.
Okay, so now we're kind of getting a sense of like, how Peru is approaching this whole concept of inclusive education.
Right.
But let's zoom in on a particular stage of education,
Okay.
university life.
There.
Because it seems like universities are making efforts, but there are still some serious challenges there
Yeah.
when it comes to inclusion.
One statistic that really jumped out at me was that only 21% of universities in Peru adapt their curricula and teaching methods to accommodate students with disabilities.
Wow. So you can be on campus,
You're there.
but you're not really included.
The environment might not be set up for you
Right.
to actually learn and thrive.
That's really interesting. Did the sources mention anything about like what kinds of fields of study
You do.
students with disabilities are choosing in Peru?
And interestingly, the most popular fields are social sciences,
Okay.
engineering, and health sciences.
I wonder why those fields in particular.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Maybe those fields are perceived as more welcoming
Oh.
or accessible,
Right.
either physically or in terms of the curriculum.
Right. Or maybe it's even something like, certain disabilities might actually lead to strengths in certain fields.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe there are skills that are really valuable in those fields
Oh, yeah.
that might be more common among people with certain disabilities.
That's really interesting. And it kind of reminds me of something else
Okay.
that we were reading about, which is that inclusive education doesn't stop.
At the classroom door.
Yeah, it's about creating a society where people with disabilities are supported
Throughout their lives.
their whole lives.
Yeah.
And I know our sources talk a lot about the role of family and healthcare professionals.
Absolutely.
So let's get into that because that's a huge part of this whole equation.
Families are often the primary caregivers
Right.
and advocates for their loved ones with disabilities.
And that's a huge responsibility.
It is.
Yeah.
They're navigating these complex healthcare systems.
Right.
They're fighting for access to resources,
Yeah.
and they're providing that constant emotional support.
Right. And that's the stuff that people don't see.
The invisible labor of love.
Yeah. And, it's so important to acknowledge that families need support too.
Absolutely. They
Yeah.
need access to respite care,
Okay.
support groups,
Right.
information to help them avoid burnout,
Yeah.
and just to make sure they can keep providing the best possible care.
So it's really about creating that network of support that includes everyone,
Everyone.
the families, the educators, the healthcare professionals.
Yeah, and healthcare professionals play such a crucial role in this network,
Yeah.
helping individuals with disabilities live full and independent lives.
And we're talking about a lot of different people here.
A wide range.
Yeah, therapists, doctors, nurses.
Our sources specifically mention rheumatology specialists,
Okay.
who are often on the front lines of helping people manage chronic pain,
Okay.
and mobility issues,
Right.
which can have a huge impact on a person's ability to participate in education and society as a whole.
So it's really about looking at the whole person.
Holistic approach,
Yeah.
addressing their physical, emotional, and social needs.
And let's not forget about the laws and the policies.
The legal framework.
Yeah, because that plays a big role too.
Absolutely.
Right.
Laws provide a foundation for change.
Okay.
They hold institutions accountable,
Right.
and they create a mechanism for actually making inclusive environments a reality.
It's not just about people wanting to do the right thing.
Right.
There has to be something that kind of backs it up.
It's about having a system in place
Yeah.
that ensures that the rights of people with disabilities are actually respected and protected.
Okay, so tell me about Peru's laws.
So Peru has made some pretty significant strides in this area.
Okay.
They have a really robust legal framework,
All right.
and the governing body that oversees all of this is
Cannabis, okay.
the National Council for the Integration of People with Disabilities.
So it sounds like they're really taking this seriously at a national level.
They are.
So let's break this down a little bit more. Like, what are some of the specific things that these laws cover
Okay.
when it comes to inclusive education?
So we're going to dive into the details of this legislation.
Let's do it.
So Peru's laws cover a lot of ground when it comes to disability rights.
Okay.
Accessibility, transportation, employment discrimination,
Okay.
the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so it's pretty comprehensive.
It is, but when it comes to education,
Right.
one of the most basic things is the right to education for all children, regardless of disability.
Okay, so not just access to education, but like the quality of that education has to be there too.
Exactly. The law says students with disabilities need to have the same chances to learn, grow, and reach their full potential as any other student.
Okay.
We're talking about creating an equal playing field where everyone's needs are met and every student has a shot at thriving.
I like that.
Yeah.
And you know, one thing that came up in the sources as well is this idea of curricular adaptations.
Right.
What exactly does that mean?
Curricular adaptations are basically tweaks to the regular curriculum
Okay.
to make it more accessible and engaging for students with disabilities.
So give me an example.
Imagine a student with dyslexia
Right.
struggling to keep up with reading assignments,
Right.
or a student with a visual impairment who can't use regular print materials.
Right.
Curricular adaptations might involve things like providing those materials in audio format,
Okay.
or coming up with different assignments that don't rely so much on reading,
Okay.
or even using special software that enlarges text or reads it aloud.
Okay, so it's about really customizing the learning experience to meet the individual needs.
Finding creative solutions
Yeah.
to make sure every student can fully participate.
I like that. And you know, we've been talking a lot about supporting students with disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
but the sources also talk about students with exceptional abilities.
Right.
The ones we often call gifted or talented.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
We often think about inclusive education in terms of supporting those with disabilities,
Right.
but it's just as important to acknowledge and cater to the needs of students who really excel academically
Right.
or have exceptional talents in other areas like music or art or athletics.
Yeah, and I can imagine those students feeling just as lost in a traditional classroom if their needs aren't being met.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where programs like Peru's PANETS come into play.
Okay, remind me what PANETS is all about.
PANETS offers enrichment activities,
Okay.
accelerated learning opportunity,
Yeah.
and a chance for these students to connect with other kids who share their intellectual curiosity and their love of learning.
It's like creating a space where these bright young minds can really shine
Yeah.
without being held back.
No limitations.
Okay, so we've got support for those who need it and challenge for those who are ready for it.
It's all about balance.
Yeah.
And that balance is crucial for creating a truly inclusive system that recognizes and celebrates that full spectrum of human abilities.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of support, let's go back to families,
Okay.
because our sources really emphasize how important that family support system is.
Absolutely. Families are often the backbone of the
Mhm.
support system,
Right.
providing not only practical care, but also that unwavering emotional support.
Right. And it's a lot to handle,
It is.
right? They're navigating medical systems, advocating for their loved ones' rights, celebrating every little victory.
And it often goes unnoticed.
Right. And so it's really important to make sure that those families are getting the support that they need.
They need support too.
Right. So what kinds of things are we talking about?
Things like respite care,
Okay.
support groups where they can connect with other families going through similar things,
Right.
financial assistance to help cover the costs.
Yeah, because it can be very expensive.
It can.
So we're talking about a web of support here
A whole network.
that includes everyone.
Families, educators, healthcare professionals,
Right.
and the community as a whole.
And speaking of healthcare professionals,
Yeah.
our sources talk a lot about the role of therapists
Yeah.
and specialists and all sorts of people.
We're talking physical therapists,
Okay.
occupational therapists,
Right.
speech language pathologists,
Okay.
and so many more.
Right. And each of those people has a really important role to play.
They do.
Yeah.
They're helping individuals with disabilities to live those full and independent lives.
Right. And sometimes that means helping them regain function after an injury.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's about teaching them adaptive strategies to overcome certain challenges.
Yeah.
So it's a really like multidisciplinary
Yeah.
approach.
It is.
Right? We're drawing on the expertise of all these different people.
And our sources also specifically mention rheumatologists who are often dealing with chronic pain and mobility issues,
Okay.
which can really affect someone's ability to participate in education and just life in general.
So it's not just about the educational needs.
It's about the whole picture.
Yeah, it's about making sure that people have access to healthcare
Yeah.
that allows them to manage their conditions
Right.
and stay healthy.
It's about creating a system where individuals feel supported and empowered throughout their lives.
Okay, and that support system goes way beyond just the classroom.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
but let's talk about technology for a minute.
Okay.
Because one of the things that really stood out to me in these sources was how much technology is changing the game
It's a game changer.
when it comes to inclusive education.
Absolutely.
Like it's opening up all these possibilities
Yeah.
for people with disabilities to learn to communicate,
Right.
to engage with the world
Yeah.
in ways that we couldn't even imagine a few decades ago.
Yeah.
So what are some specific examples of how technology is being used?
Okay, so think about assistive technologies,
Okay.
like text-to-speech software,
Okay.
which can read digital text aloud for students with visual impairments or dyslexia,
Okay, so
or speech recognition software that translates spoken words into text.
okay.
So students with physical disabilities that affect their writing can participate more fully.
Okay, so we're breaking down these barriers to learning
Exactly.
and allowing students to access information.
And express themselves
Right.
in ways that they might not have been able to before.
And it seems like the technology is just getting more and more advanced all the time.
It is.
Like virtual reality, for example.
Yeah, virtual reality can create these immersive learning environments
Yeah.
that can really cater to different learning styles and allow students to experience things that might be physically out of reach.
Yeah, and I can imagine that being particularly helpful for students with physical disabilities
Yeah.
who might not be able to go on a field trip or participate in a certain activity.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's about more than just accessibility. It's about creating this like really engaging learning experience for everyone.
And technology can also be used to personalize the learning experience.
Okay.
Create those adaptive learning platforms
Right.
that adjust the pace and the difficulty level
Right.
based on the student's individual needs.
That's really cool. And one thing we haven't really touched on yet is social inclusion
Right.
and how technology can help with that.
So think about social media.
Okay.
Social media platforms can connect individuals with disabilities
Yeah.
and create these online communities where
Right.
they can share experiences, offer support, advocate for change.
So it's like creating this sense of belonging and breaking down that isolation that can sometimes happen.
Absolutely. And those connections can spill over into the real world. Online communities can lead to real friendships and collaborations.
That's fantastic. But I do want to kind of go back to this idea of inclusion.
Okay.
Because I think it can be a pretty broad term.
It's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
It means different things to different people.
Right. And our sources spend a lot of time talking about the inclusion of students with exceptional abilities.
Yeah.
the ones we call gifted or talented.
It's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Because inclusive education isn't just about supporting those with disabilities.
Right.
It's also about recognizing and nurturing the unique needs of students who really excel academically or have those exceptional talents in other areas.
Yeah, and that reminds me of PANETS,
Yes.
which we talked about earlier.
Right.
Can you give me a little more detail about how that program actually works?
PANETS offers a whole range of services,
Okay.
including assessments to identify giftedness, enrichment programs that go beyond the regular curriculum,
Okay.
and support for families who are figuring out how to navigate the unique challenges of raising a gifted child.
So it's really like a comprehensive support system
It is.
for these students and their families.
And it shows that inclusive education isn't just about providing extra support for those who need it,
Right.
but also about challenging those who are ready to really push themselves.
And excel.
Exactly.
Okay. But let's get back to the more like nuts and bolts of implementing inclusive education in Peru.
Right.
What are some of the actual initiatives or programs that are happening on the ground?
Okay, so one program that stood out to me was the PREBs.
Okay, what does that stand for?
Centros de Recursos de Educación Básica, especially.
Okay, and what are they?
They're like resource hubs for inclusive education.
Okay.
So they offer support and guidance to teachers, families, and students with disabilities.
Okay.
They might have specialized libraries with braille books or large print materials. They might have assistive technologies like screen readers
Okay.
and communication devices.
Cool.
They might even have therapists who can provide assessments and interventions.
So it's like a way to kind of make sure that all these inclusive practices are actually happening?
Yeah, making sure they're being implemented effectively.
Okay. And what about specialized schools? Are there any like specific schools for students with disabilities?
Yes, there are the CBs,
Okay. What does that stand for?
Centros de Educación Básica.
And what are those?
These are schools that are specifically designed for students with severe or multiple disabilities
Okay.
who might not be able to thrive in a regular classroom setting.
So it's about providing a more focused and tailored environment.
Exactly. They have specially trained teachers,
Okay.
adapted curricula,
Right.
and facilities that are equipped to meet those unique needs.
It's about recognizing that one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
And making sure that there are options for everyone. One thing that I also wanted to touch on is social inclusion.
Okay.
Because, we've talked a lot about education, but it's not just about that.
It's about creating a society where everyone feels like they belong
Right.
and can participate fully.
So it's more than just physical access. It's about creating that social environment that's welcoming and inclusive.
Where everyone feels valued and respected.
Yeah, and that really brings us to a bigger conversation about attitudes
Yeah.
towards disability in Peru.
Yeah. Even with the best laws and policies,
Right.
you can still have those deep-seated stigmas and prejudices.
Yeah, and that creates those invisible barriers
Absolutely.
that are just as real as the physical ones.
It's like you're constantly hitting a wall.
Right.
You can't see it.
Yeah, and so it's really about changing hearts and minds.
It is
Yeah.
challenging those stereotypes, promoting positive representations of people with disabilities in the media,
Okay.
creating opportunities for meaningful interactions.
Right. So it's about moving beyond just tolerance
Yeah.
and really embracing true inclusion.
Where everyone feels like they belong
Yeah.
and can contribute to society.
And one area where I think this is particularly important
Okay.
is employment.
Employment is a big one.
Yeah, our sources talk about how important it is to create opportunities for people with disability.
To participate in the workforce.
To have those jobs.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that people with disabilities face when it comes to employment?
One of the biggest challenges is discrimination.
Okay.
A lot of employers still have these negative stereotypes
Yeah.
about people with disabilities.
Right.
Believing that they're less capable or less reliable.
And that can lead to them not getting hired.
It can lead to discrimination in hiring practices.
Right.
Or even subtle forms of exclusion within the workplace.
It's really sad to hear that those attitudes still exist,
It is.
especially when we see so much progress being made in other areas.
Yeah, but that's why those laws that protect the employment rights of people with disabilities are so important.
Right. So in Peru, what are some of those laws?
So in Peru, employers have to make reasonable accommodations
Okay.
to help qualified individuals with disabilities do their jobs.
Okay.
And those accommodations can vary depending on the person's needs
Right.
and the type of job.
Right. So what are some examples?
We could be talking about providing assistive technology, like screen readers for employees with visual impairments,
Right.
or ergonomic keyboards for those with mobility limitations, or maybe it's modifying the workspace to make it more accessible.
Yeah.
Adjustable desks,
Okay.
wider doorways for wheelchairs,
Right.
or even adjusting work schedules
Okay.
to fit medical appointments or therapy sessions.
So it's really about being flexible and creative.
Finding solutions that allow individuals with disabilities to use their skills and talents without facing unnecessary obstacles.
And I imagine it's not just about the legal obligation.
No.
It's about recognizing that people with disabilities bring a lot to the table,
They do.
right? They bring value. They bring talent.
They bring new perspective.
Right. Diversity in the workforce is a good thing.
It is. It leads to innovation and creativity.
And you get a richer understanding of customer needs.
Absolutely.
Because you've got all these different people with different experiences.
Right.
So it's really a win-win.
It is.
The employers benefit and the individuals with disabilities.
Gain a sense of purpose and independence.
That's great. And we were talking earlier about invisible disabilities and chronic illnesses.
Yeah.
Our sources talk about that as well.
So when we think about disability, we often picture physical limitations.
Yeah.
But chronic illnesses can have a big impact.
Right. Even if you can't see them.
Even if they're invisible.
Yeah.
They can affect a person's ability to function and participate in society.
And that includes education.
Absolutely.
Right. So when we're talking about inclusive education, we need to be thinking about the needs of students with chronic illnesses too.
We do.
So what are some of those conditions that we're talking about?
Things like arthritis, heart disease, diabetes, mental health conditions. These can cause pain fatigue, mobility issues, even cognitive impairments.
So it makes it really hard to learn
in
a traditional classroom setting.
It can.
Okay, so what kind of support do those students need?
It depends on the individual and their illness.
Yeah.
But we might be talking about flexible attendance policies,
Okay.
access to rest areas during the school day, modified assignments,
Okay.
even homebound instruction
Okay.
for students who can't attend school regularly.
So it's about creating that supportive environment
Yeah.
where students feel comfortable talking about their needs.
And getting the help they need to succeed.
And I imagine it's also important to educate teachers and classmates about these invisible disabilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that they can be more understanding and supportive.
So it's about creating that culture of empathy.
That's a key ingredient for true inclusion.
Okay. And we were talking earlier about the laws in Peru and the legal framework that supports inclusive education.
Right.
Our sources really emphasize that Peru has made a lot of progress in this area.
They have.
And it's important to remember that laws are what create change.
They're the foundation.
Right.
They hold people accountable.
Right.
And they give people with disabilities the power to fight discrimination.
Right. It's not just about good intentions.
It's about having a system in place
that protects their rights.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me more about Peru's legislation.
Peru's laws cover a lot of ground when it comes to disability rights.
Okay.
Accessibility, education, employment. It's all in there.
So let's get into some of the specifics. What exactly do these laws say?
One of the most fundamental things is the right to education.
Okay.
For all children.
Regardless of disability.
Regardless of disability.
Okay, so that means that all kids have the right to go to school?
And get an education that meets their needs.
Right. And it's not just about being in the classroom.
Right.
It's about the quality of that education being equal.
It has to be equitable.
Okay, so students with disabilities should have the same chances to learn and grow.
As their non-disabled peers.
As any other student.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's about leveling the playing field.
Creating a truly inclusive system.
Yeah. And does that right to education extend beyond primary school?
It does.
Okay.
Peru's laws also address the right to higher education for people with disabilities.
So we're talking about universities?
University.
Vocational training programs?
All of that.
So they have those opportunities to pursue their careers.
The same opportunities as everyone else.
That's fantastic.
It is.
And it's not just about education.
No. The laws also cover things like accessibility.
Okay.
Making sure that buildings, transportation, public spaces are designed in a way that allows people with disabilities to get around easily and safely.
So they can participate fully
Yeah.
in all aspects of life.
Without running into those unnecessary barriers.
Okay. And I imagine that accessibility extends to the online world as well.
It does.
Right.
Peru's laws talk about the need for websites,
Okay.
apps, online platforms to be designed in a way that makes them accessible to people with disabilities.
So what kind of things are we talking about specifically?
Things like providing alternative text for images,
Okay.
using clear and concise language,
Okay.
making sure things are compatible with assistive technologies like screen readers.
So it's recognizing that accessibility is key.
Essential.
Yeah, for full participation.
In today's digital world.
Yeah. And another thing that our sources talk about is employment
Right.
and the right to employment for people with disabilities.
So the laws say that employers can't discriminate against qualified individuals because of their disability.
Okay.
And they have to make reasonable accommodations to help them do their jobs effectively.
So again, it's about creating that level playing field.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And making sure that everyone has a chance to contribute their talents and skills.
Yeah. And who enforces all these laws?
That's CANADIS,
Right, Canese.
the National Council for the Integration of People with Disabilities.
Right.
They're in charge of promoting awareness,
Yep.
developing programs,
Okay.
and making sure those rights are respected and upheld.
So it's really a sign that Peru is taking this seriously
Yeah,
at a national level.
they are.
Okay, so it sounds like Peru has a really strong legal framework in place
They do.
to support the rights of people with disabilities.
And while there's always room for improvement,
Right.
this legislation provides a really solid foundation
Okay.
for creating a more inclusive and equitable society
For everyone.
for everyone.
And you know, as we keep talking about inclusion,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we don't forget about students with exceptional abilities,
Right.
the ones we often call gifted or talented.
So inclusive education isn't just about supporting those with disabilities.
Right.
It's also about recognizing and nurturing the unique needs of those students who really excel academically
Okay.
or artistically or athletically.
Yeah. They need support too.
They do. They need different types of support.
Right.
And different types of challenges
Yeah.
to help them reach their full potential.
And that might mean accelerated learning programs,
Yeah.
enriched curricula,
Hey.
opportunities to connect with other gifted students.
It's all about finding what works for each individual.
Yeah. And recognizing that every student deserves an education that allows them to thrive.
Absolutely.
Okay. And that reminds me of PANETS,
Yes.
which we talked about earlier.
Great.
Can you just refresh my memory on what PANETS does and how it supports these students?
So PANETS stands for Programa de Atención No Escolarizada al Talento y Superdotación.
Okay.
And it offers a variety of services, like
Okay.
assessments to identify giftedness,
Okay.
enrichment programs that go beyond the standard curriculum,
Okay.
and support for those families who are trying to figure out how to raise a gifted child.
So it's really a valuable resource
It is.
for both the students and their families.
Absolutely.
And it highlights the fact that inclusive education isn't just about providing extra support,
It's not just about that.
right? It's also about challenging those students who are ready to soar.
To reach their full potential.
Yeah.
It's about creating a system that recognizes and celebrates that full spectrum of human potential.
I love that. Yeah, it's amazing to think about all these young minds out there just like ready to absorb everything.
Over sponges.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so how can we best nurture those eager learners?
One common approach is something called acceleration,
Okay.
which basically means moving students through the curriculum faster than their peers.
So like skipping a grade
Yeah.
or taking more advanced classes?
Yeah, maybe taking courses that are typically for older students.
Okay.
And this can be really helpful for students who are already mastering things much faster than their classmates.
So they don't get bored.
Right. It keeps them engaged
And they can really delve into the things that they're interested in.
at a level that's appropriate for them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about those students who maybe aren't quite ready to skip ahead,
Yeah.
but they still need a little more,
A little more oomph.
a little more challenge in their learning?
That's where enrichment comes in.
Okay.
So enrichment means giving students opportunities to explore topics in more depth or breadth
Okay.
than what's covered in the regular curriculum.
So what are we talking about? Like independent research,
Independent research.
research programs,
Maybe.
competitions?
Yeah, even workshops where they can apply what they're learning in real-world settings.
So it's about going beyond the textbook and really fostering that love of learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that brings us to early identification.
Right.
Because the sooner we can recognize these exceptional abilities,
The better.
the better we can support them.
Yeah.
But how do we even know?
It's not always obvious.
Right.
Some kids show those classic signs like advanced vocabulary or a really intense curiosity,
Okay.
but others are more subtle.
Right.
Maybe they express their giftedness through creativity or problem solving or even empathy.
Okay, so how do we make sure that those less obvious signs don't get missed?
That's where careful observation comes in,
Okay.
both from educators and from parents.
Right.
They can look for clues in the child's behavior,
Okay.
their interests,
Okay.
their learning patterns.
Okay. And are there like any formal assessments?
There are standardized tests
Okay.
and observational tools that can help give a more formal assessment of the child's abilities.
So it's really like a combination of paying attention and professional expertise. Okay, so let's say we've identified a child as gifted.
Okay.
Now, how do we support them?
Well, it depends on the child's needs and the resources available.
Right.
But ideally, you want a combination of things.
Okay.
Access to programs like PANETs,
Okay.
mentorship opportunities,
Okay.
maybe even counseling
Okay.
to help them navigate the social and emotional challenges that can come with being gifted.
Because it's not always easy.
No,
Right.
gifted kids can face unique challenges,
Well, go ahead.
feeling different from their peers,
Okay.
struggling with perfectionism,
Yeah.
or being really emotionally sensitive.
Okay, so we need to give them the tools to handle that,
We do.
along with nurturing their academic ability.
It's about supporting the whole child, not just their intellect.
And when we do that,
Yeah.
we're not just helping that individual child.
Right.
We're helping society as a whole.
We're investing in the future.
Right.
These are the kids who are going to make groundbreaking discoveries.
Yeah.
Come up with solutions to our problem. Yeah.
Push the limits of human knowledge and creativity.
It's pretty exciting to think about.
It is.
So as we kind of wrap up this whole deep dive into inclusive education in Peru,
Yeah.
what are your overall thoughts?
I'm really impressed by Peru's multifaceted approach.
Okay.
They're not just focusing on one thing, like accessibility
Right.
or legal rights.
Yeah.
They're tackling it from all angles.
Okay.
Laws, teacher training, early intervention, social awareness campaigns.
So they're really looking at the big picture.
They are.
Okay.
They understand that all these things are connected.
That's great. And it sounds like while there's still work to be done,
There's always work to be done.
Peru is really committed to this.
They are.
Yeah.
They want to create a truly inclusive and equitable education system
For all students.
for everyone.
It's inspiring to see.
It is.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
He's got a great conversation.
I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure. And to all of you listening out there, remember, this is just the beginning of your journey.
Keep learning.
Keep exploring,
Keep advocating.
because when we create a world where everyone can thrive, we all benefit.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.